Hello, Dr. Ronald. How are you?
Hello, Deepti. Nice to nice to meet you.
Same here. Thank you so much for accepting my invite to be on my podcast. Looking forward to amazing conversation with you. And so before we start, I would just want to introduce you first, and then we take on with the conversation. So Dr. Ronald Steiner is famously known as Yoga Doc. He is a sports physician, researcher with focus on prevention and rehab, and one of the most well-known practitioners of Ashtanga Yoga. Dr. Ronald is one of the few yoga teachers authorized by the Indian masters Sri K. Pattabhi Jois and BNS Iyengar. And Ashtanga pioneer Dr. Ronald is one of the very few yogis in the world who masters the third series of Ashtanga Yoga. So that's just amazing, Dr. Ronald. And so, let's start with the very basic question. First things first, what brought to you to yoga, and how did you find your teachers?
Sorry, the first part of the question.
That's the first question, yes.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. How did yoga happen to you, and what brought you to, like, how did you find your teachers?
Yeah. So, how did yoga happen to me? It actually
Yes.
had happened to me because when I was a kid, my mother already was a yoga teacher, and
Hmm.
as a little kid, I was fascinated about the supernatural powers of those yogis. So my mother read stories from India to me, and there are tales where yogis hold up the arm for um, thousands of years, and then they get power and make gods fulfill their wishes, and they
Hmm.
do meditation until ants build mountains around them. And these stories were fascinating for me, and I wanted to get supernatural powers as every kid.
And
Like
I believe you've gotten those
I wanted to
for
become
sure.
not a ninja. I wanted to become a yogi who can fly and can disappear,
Hmm.
and so I started practicing yoga as a kid. So my mother
Hmm.
was a yoga teacher, but I, as a kid, decided I I like it. It's interesting for me, and so I started meditation. I started breathing exercises as a kid because those were the exercises that I believed gave those supernatural powers,
Hmm.
and they were more fascinating for me compared to physical postures of yoga. So I did more meditation, breathing techniques, and less physical exercises.
Hmm.
That was
So that's
my
very
first.
interesting. That's very interesting to know. I mean, I'm just wondering, being an Indian and belonging to India, the wave of yoga actually started spreading out in India, not like many years back, about say it's about say 15 or 20 years back, that people actually started realizing in India that yoga is powerful, yoga is something. Otherwise, it was a very hidden science. And I'm just wondering, like, your mother already knowing yoga, practicing yoga, which would have been like so many years back, that kind of an awareness happening, and especially I believe being from the West and still being aware of yoga. It's just amazing how yoga did just spread out, across the world way faster than how it happened in India.
I spent a lot of time researching this, how yoga
Mhm.
evolved and how yoga
Mhm.
changed in the last years. So in India, and it's very linked to the Western world. So India
Mhm.
was colonized by the English people, and
Okay.
so there was a resistance movement in India to get rid of the English people, and this
Mhm.
resistance movement, which was on its peak point at the beginning of the 20th century, so
Okay.
1920,
Yeah.
yeah, was at its peak point, and the Indians, as it's very usual, if you are depressed by another country,
Mhm.
which destroys your culture, you
Yeah.
decide to look back to your own culture. And so, this resistance movement in India, they tried to recreate yoga because a lot of yoga was destroyed actually through the colonial time and the Christianization and the Muslims. And so India had a lot of effects. And basically, when you look in the past of India, the last 500 years, despite the last 100 years, so from 1500 to 100 years ago, it was like the Muslims, the Christians, the English,
Right.
even the Hindus themselves, they thought yoga should not be part of Hinduism. And so yoga got depressed, and a lot of the living culture of yoga and living tradition was destroyed. But 100 years ago, in India, there was a movement to look back in its own tradition and to say, we are India, we want to get rid of the English,
Right.
and we want to get think what's good in our country. And yoga was one of the idealization and identification things in India. And the Western world romanticized India in this time, because the Western world was looking for something that's more pure, more ancient compared to Europe. And so it was at the same time. So the Western world idealized India, and India itself also idealized its own culture, which is actually a big problem, because when you look at the things idealized, and that's, I think, the bad part of it. The bad part is that a lot of things we learn about yoga now is not true history, it's idealized history. So when you talk with an Indian person, you hear, and India is great, certainly. I don't want to say anything bad about India, but you hear, oh, India invented mathematics 10,000 years before Christ, and the language 20,000 years before Christ, and we did already yoga postures 100,000 years ago, and you see these immense numbers which are not backed by science, because it was an idealization the Indians did, and Europeans jumped on this idealization, and then the European psychologists, psychotherapists like Sigmund Freud or those, they also used Indian philosophy to base their therapy methods or their philosophy on Indian philosophy, but it also was idealized. And there was a special connection between Germany, actually a really bad connection between Germany and India at the beginning of the 20th century. So the Indians, they had an enemy, which is England, certainly. It was colonized by England. And the Germans, the Nazi Germany, had an enemy, which was also England. And so if you have the same enemy, you're kind of friends. And so the Indian resistance movement officially partnered with the German National Party in Germany. So for all who are not German, in Germany we had the Nazi regime at the beginning of the 20th century. Very bad things happened, but the Germans especially idealized India. So we had the swastika, this German flag, red, white, with the swastika on, which is actually just taken from India. Ganesha has a swastika on his hand, even red and white. So the Germans idealized India, and there were German Nazis who tried to recreate a German religion out of Indian philosophy. So one of the worst Nazis, called Himmler, the guy who created the wars in this time, and he didn't leave home without carrying a Bhagavad Gita. So it was like, he was, I think, I didn't meet him, but what people say, he was a very bad guy. So he was kind of responsible for the World War that happened. And when you read the Bhagavad Gita in a very superficial way, it's like, oh, Arjuna, go fight because you're there for fighting. And if you are kind of a war guy, then you say,
it's amazing.
And
that's so interesting.
Lot of connection. And so yoga came to Germany, but also to the rest of Europe, and starting 1920. And in India, yoga was also reinvented 1920 by Krishnamacharya and his colleagues. So there was a big yoga boom in India, and Germany and Europe took it up. And my parents certainly didn't live at that time, but a little later. And the yoga boom, so the yoga movement grew in Germany, mostly pushed forward by B.K.S. Iyengar. So the book Life and Yoga by B.K.S. Iyengar was very famous in Europe. And hundreds, thousands of Iyengar yoga schools around Germany in the 15th, 16th, and then came the hippie movement, and in Europe, the hippies all traveled to India, wanted to learn yoga and to teach yoga, wanted to do yoga in Europe also. And so my parents were in part of this time. Yeah, so they were after the war, certainly, yeah, but they had a lot of Iyengar yoga around, and was this hippie movement with a lot of spirituality. And so yoga was big in Europe, and it's still big. It changes, certainly. It's completely different. When I look at the old books of my mother, how yoga looked 50 years ago, it's very different. But there was a lot of yoga in Europe at that time. And in India, it's possible that after India got independent, yoga went a little down in India and coming back. That's possible. In Europe, it was more, it started 1920, and it kind of...
The boom was there since then.
Went up all the time.
Okay. Yeah, so we started seeing the boom in India not before, like about say 20 years back or so, with some yoga teachers starting their sessions early in the morning, and through television it just spread out. Now it's a big thing. So, but it's that's really interesting to know, because what you're mentioning, I knew that about Ayurveda, but I did not knew that how yoga was suppressed during those years, and then how the boom happened. But it's really interesting to know how it grew in Germany also. Thank you for that. So coming back to our discussion, how did you find your teachers?
Yeah, the question with your teachers, for me, it's a very difficult question, because I feel, from my point of view, it's a little outdated. The perspective to say there's only one teacher and one student. So my teacher, Pattabhi Jois, he said, listen, one teacher, one student. And then he made the famous joke, and he said, one patient,
that's right.
one doctor, one patient, many doctor, death. And then he went on and he said, one man, one woman. One man, many women. Oh, yeah, that was Pattabhi Jois. So he said, one student, one teacher. And certainly it's a little true. I'm a yoga teacher now myself, and it's really hard if I teach yoga and I tell somebody, oh, do this. And 1 week later, he comes and does it completely different. And then he said, oh, the teacher over there told me to do it like this. And I said, yeah, well, but you're now in my class. And it's a little bit annoying if you teach this and the other teacher teaches this. And then, yeah.
But I know what you're saying. I experience the same thing in my classes as well. And especially in the westernized understanding of yoga, especially in the fitness studios where they have those standardized formats. And so I know what you're saying. I mean, but
the other side is communication. Communication usually increases understanding. So in medicine, the same thing happened. So many years ago, there was one barber, and he had one student, and they traveled, and the student learned only from one person the medical techniques. And since there were books, publications, meetings, science, it certainly got more confusing, but at the end, it also grew. The knowledge about medicine grew. And I see the same thing happening in yoga. So we have yoga books, we have YouTube channels about yoga, we have yoga studios.
It's a different world. It's a completely a different world in itself, like online, offline.
And so getting different influences from different perspectives of yoga at the end is something that might be confusing on one point, but at the end, it's something that pushes innovation forward. And same for me. So my first yoga teacher was certainly my mother, and then I learned yoga from different teachers in Germany, but also from books. So all people say, oh, I have a physical teacher, but a book is also kind of a teacher. And then I went to India, I went directly to Pattabhi Jois because I already practiced Ashtanga yoga, which I learned in the Western world by the first Ashtanga teachers who were traveling through Europe and were teaching Ashtanga yoga. And so I learned from them Ashtanga yoga. And then when I went to India, I actually was already practicing 4 series of Ashtanga yoga when I first arrived in India and was studying with Pattabhi Jois and with B and as Iyengar in alternating.
This was in which year? This was in which year?
That was in the beginning of, or at the end of 1999 and then 2000.
Oh,
so
that's amazing.
Yeah,
Right, so almost 25 years of being with your teachers.
Hmm?
Almost 25 years of, practicing that lineage and that tradition.
Yeah, but I also practiced it before. So I was already practicing Ashtanga yoga, as I said, 4 series. So, when I went to India with Pattabhi Jois, I had to restart from learning sun salutation A again, but it was pretty fast because I already knew how the poses were, and then it was kind of some new perspectives and new ideas.
Okay, so I think I'm quite intrigued about this idea of Ashtanga yoga. I mean, being a non-Ashtangi, this form actually, really attracts me a lot. So, what do you think? And I'm asking this question more from the perspective of a non-Ashtangi. Like, what is so special about Ashtanga practice that the world is crazy about it? And there's such a strong sense of community in the Ashtangis. And each person who practices Ashtanga comes across as a very strong person with a sense of purpose, with exuding all that spirituality. So you can actually make out somebody who's very deeply practicing Ashtanga has a different presence, a different way of presenting themselves or expressing themselves. So you already being in that space, what is it that's so magnetic about this practice that it completely changes the personality of the one who constantly practices Ashtanga practice?
I have 3 ideas which are very special and unique for Ashtanga yoga, which I don't see in any other type of yoga. But first, to make it clear, I'm not like an only Ashtanga guy. I love Ashtanga yoga. I practice Ashtanga yoga. That's my main practice. But I'm very open for other styles of yoga also. And I don't want to say Ashtanga is the best of all, but Ashtanga yoga has 3 very unique things, which are in its uniqueness the best for what they are. Yeah? So other types of yoga are also the best from another perspective, but those 3 things are really strong in Ashtanga yoga. The first, in Ashtanga, we call it Tristana, but from a scientific point of view, we call the phenomenon synchronicity. So when you hear a rhythm, it also works with music. You can listen to music, and if the music just says dum 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 dum, and if you listen to it 1 hour, you're in a meditative state.
Right.
And in Ashtanga,
your mind just flows. Mind just flows into that timeless space.
Because it's the same rhythm. And in Ashtanga yoga, we create a rhythm with the breathing, with a soft hissing sound. Some call it ujjayi, some just call it breathing with sound. And on this rhythm, we synchronize the movements, and we synchronize how we direct energy in our body, and we synchronize how we direct our senses, especially our gaze. And so everything that we have, our physical body, our energetic body, and our sense and emotional body are synchronized in the same rhythm. And this alone creates a meditative state. And for me, it's like I just need to start breathing like this. And it's hard for me to continue speaking with you because I'm pulled in this meditative state. It's like a trigger. Like I just breathe like this, and I noticed I'm absorbed. I want to stop talking because I'm diving into the meditation. So this is very special for Ashtanga yoga. Vinyasa yoga has it a little bit, but in Ashtanga yoga, it's more significant and obvious because usually we don't have music. We are focusing. And now comes the second thing which makes Ashtanga yoga special. Ashtanga yoga has a very fixed sequence. even each movement is fixed and synchronized with the breath. We call it Vinyasa count. So it's not like we are going from headstand to shoulder stand, and then comes the forward bend and then the back bend, like other sequences are. And what you do in between is kind of open. In Ashtanga yoga, you do this movement synchronized with this breath, and it's completely fixed. And what happens? It happens something like a piece of music created with the body. And it's the same thing happening with music. So if you create a piece of music playing on the piano, and you know the piece of music, and you know what you want to play or what you're gonna play, and you hit the first note, then your fingers moving along because it's a melody which is already there. Or if you start singing a song that you like and you sing the first word, it's almost impossible to stop. You go on. Yeah, you sing the full song, and even if you sang it once, it's like a
Replay in mind.
you call it bug in English. Yeah, it sticks in the mind. It carries you on, and that's what's happening in Ashtanga yoga. So when I step on the mat, and I just need to step on, create the hissing sound, lift up my arms, and then I feel that the movement pattern, which is already there because I created it over the last 35 years of practicing Ashtanga yoga. So I'm getting in a draft that pulls me through the practice. So practicing Ashtanga yoga becomes very easy because you're in this draft. It's like riding a bike. Once you're in the draft, you can go forever. Or it's like singing
Right. So
a
it's
song.
basically you're saying it sets in your reflexes, like you drive a car, then you don't have to think about it. You just drive, and then you can kind of just flow with that.
I would say driving a car is kind of automatic.
Mm-hmm.
Ashtanga yoga is more like a song. You
Okay.
sing the song and you dive in the song. Yeah, it's not really automatic. It's a pull towards it.
Okay.
And the
Okay.
third thing about Ashtanga yoga, which makes it very special for me, is
Mm-hmm.
in Ashtanga yoga, I also haven't seen it in any other style of yoga in this way. The traditional way of teaching Ashtanga yoga is called Mysore style, named
Yeah.
after the Indian city Mysore. But what happens? Everybody practices in their own way, in their own speed, their own sequence. So it's the fixed sequence of Ashtanga yoga, but even within the fixed sequence, there's a lot of freedom. Yeah. So the obvious freedom, you have primary, intermediate, advanced series, but also where you start in the series, how deep you go in the postures. If you do a little adjustment, I place my hand like this. Yeah, so it's your personal practice that you can practice on your own, and you get a one-to-one support by the teacher, which is very, very special. I love it about Ashtanga yoga because, first of all, when I as a practitioner step on my mat in a room, I'm sure I can do my own practice. If I go to another yoga class, I need to stick with what the teacher says, kind of.
Right.
Yeah, the teacher
Right.
says do this, and I interpret it and do it in the way that it feels for me. And the teacher say do this or this. They give me a few options, and I take the one that fits for me. But in Ashtanga, it's my personal practice. And when I go in class, I have 100%. I don't need to wait until the teacher explains something. I just do it. And certainly I don't get a lot of attention from the teacher in one class, but I get a little attention at the point where I really need it. And that's very special about Ashtanga yoga as well. And so those 3 points, so the breathing meditation, the fixed sequence, and the Mysore style, I think makes Ashtanga yoga unique. And that's why I still love it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, I mean, it's so interesting to know the depths of this practice. So, so we've just discussed the tradition of the practice and the sequence, but from your perspective, being a medical doctor and also coming from the tradition, um, what does Ashtanga practice stand for traditionally, scientifically, medically, and energetically? So just to be more precise about my question, when we talk of Ashtanga sequences, primary, secondary, or the third one, is there any logic behind how the sequences have been laid out by the tradition? And how does science justify that logic? So I'll tell you where I'm coming from. So I learned a Shivananda yoga like a few years back, and when I went to the ashram and when I so I was very keen on understanding why this sequence only, because in that practice also there is a specific sequence that you keep practicing, and it's like the same sequence. So when I delved deeper, I came to know that this sequence, because the ancient Swami Shivananda was practicing the same sequence, and using the same sequence, he reached a state of samadhi. But scientifically, it's known to work on your nervous system and your hormonal system. So that's the root level logic why that sequence was devised that way, because it's working on your chakra, starting from your top chakra and flowing towards the lower chakras, and that's how the sequence has been devised in that lineage. So coming from the same understanding, I'm just wondering, is there any similar logic to the Ashtanga sequences as well?
Yes, there is. I need to clarify something. So yoga evolved. I think at the very beginning, I talked about how yoga evolved and changed during the last 100 years. And historically seen, the first time classical yoga poses were done, like Trikonasana or the sun salutation or Virabhadrasana, in a yogic context. So not Trikonasana, certainly people were bending forward to pick up an apple or something, possibly the Neanderthals or the Australopithecus were already doing, I reach for an apple. But to call it yoga practice, it's about 100 years. So it started with the beginning of the 20th century, that the classical yoga poses that we now today associate with yoga were introduced in yoga. Yoga before 100 years were mostly breathing exercises, meditation exercises, and some few physical postures, which were mostly sitting postures suitable for directing energy. So we have to see that, at least from the point of the Indological point of view that I learned from university, which I stick, and I think the university knowledge is right. So as I understand, the physical practice of yoga as we know it today is quite young. So it's happened 100 years ago.
And did this start with Krishnamacharya? Like that was the beginning of the modern understanding of
yes,
what we do
mostly.
today.
Yeah, if we go scientific, we can see that it was not only Krishnamacharya. There was also Kaivalyananda who was, and Vishnu Bindu Ghosh, I think is what his name, and a few others, Rao and Aya, and they formed a new type of yoga, which was more physical, which involved sun salutations. But Krishnamacharya was certainly at the forefront of this yoga, and he started teaching 1924 in Hassan, so very close to Mysore. And that was the first point where the Ashtanga yoga sequence started. So there's no Ashtanga yoga sequence older than 1924.
Okay.
And even 1924, Krishnamacharya was not teaching primary, intermediate, advanced A and B. He was experimenting with different aspects, which kind of led to what we now know as Ashtanga yoga. There's a video of Krishnamacharya doing yoga, I think 1936. You find it on YouTube, a black-white video. You see Krishnamacharya practicing. And when you're not really deep in Ashtanga yoga, you say, oh, cool, he's practicing advanced A series on this video. If you're in Ashtanga, you see, oh, his drishti is different. Oh, what is he doing with this hand? The Vinyasa count is a little different. So the sequences of Ashtanga yoga evolved.
Okay.
That's, from me, that's scientific fact. Unfortunately, Pattabhi Jois, so one of my most important teachers, proclaimed that Ashtanga yoga, the sequence, that we are practicing is thousands of years old and comes from the Rig Veda. So when I started Ashtanga Yoga, I believed that in the Rig Veda, which is a book about 4,000 years old, the sequence of Ashtanga Yoga was already practiced or laid in. And this comes from the Indian resistance movement, because Krishnamacharya was part of the Indian resistance movement, and he didn't want to say, oh, I'm just creating a new form of yoga. He said, I'm recreating a very ancient form of yoga that's already there for 4,000 years. And this claim was very convincing for the Indians, because that's what the Indians wanted to hear, because we had to get rid of the English.
Right. I understand.
Yeah. And that's what also the Europeans wanted to believe, because they idealized India. And when I started Ashtanga Yoga, I also believed it and said, okay, I'm doing a 4,000-year-old physical practice. But the practice evolved 100 years ago. And the 4 series, Krishnamacharya gave them names. So the first series was called Yoga Chikitsa, so which means yoga therapy. So the idea is that when you start practicing the sequence, your body gets strong, fit, you get flexible, you cure different diseases, which from my point of view is kind of, yes, when I see people who are in a suboptimal state of health, and if they dive into the Ashtanga practice, create the rhythm, create the movement, it changes a lot on a physical level. The second sequence, it involves a lot of back bending. It's called Nadi Shodhana, so the same name as the breathing exercise. So it's said to cleanse the energetic channels. And again, when people practice the second series, it's very famous and very obvious that people feel energetic disbalances, they get nightmares, they get emotional disbalances, because you're doing back bends and twists and kind of manipulating, obviously, your emotional system. And so emotional disbalances get up. And when you continue practicing it, it really feels like it clears you and you're getting more stable on an emotional level. The third series is called Sthira Bhaga, so which means mighty stability. And when you dive into the third series, it looks acrobatic from the outside, but what I experience when I practice, I get very calm and steady when I do it. It's focusing a lot of arm balances. And again, when you balance on your arm, you really need to be focused. When you balance on your arm and you look to the side, oh, what is he doing or she doing? Then you fall immediately. So you need to be focused. And so the physical practice helps you getting this mental stability. So the names kind of fit good. And the fourth series is also called Sthira Bhaga. So it's the same name as the third series. The feeling is kind of similar. It involves more back bending, but third series involves more handstanding and forward bending. The fourth involves more back bending. And it also creates this mental stability.
Okay. So from scientific perspective, if we talk about these 4 sequences, what's your viewpoint? Like scientifically, how does it help a practitioner? I mean, from the fitness parameter perspective or any other scientific perspective that you come across, like primary series, is working on these parameters. The secondary series is working on these parameters. So can we, kind of differentiate between how scientifically it's working on different parameters?
Yeah, there's no science about it. So there have not been any good studies I know from which compare the 4 sequences, but I just came across a study from 2000, so it's from 2020, so it's just 5 years old, quite recent. They made functional MRI scans of the brain for Ashtanga practitioners and non-practitioners, and they found out that the Ashtanga practitioners correlating with their years of practice, have less activity in brain regions which are responsible for mental stress and emotional disbalances. So it really seems when you practice Ashtanga yoga for a longer time, you reduce your stress and your emotional disbalances, which fits to what I observe from my students, and I observe how they are practicing,
Okay.
and which I also observe from myself, from my practice. I really have the feeling that Ashtanga yoga gives me mental clarity, which is backed on science. This study didn't differentiate between the series, which I think is perfectly fine, because as I understand it, the main thing from a scientific point of view, if you look at your brain, what's happening is this regular breathing, where you synchronize everything with following the fixed sequence and doing your own practice in your own speed. So this is the thing which helps on the brain most. And then the difference between the sequences or the series, primary, intermediate, advanced, might be minor compared to this main benefit that Ashtanga brings.
Okay, great. So, so we've just talked about these fixed sequences in 4 different ways done: primary, secondary, third, and fourth. Now, when you started practicing Ashtanga and reaching say third series, which I believe not many people have reached like in this era today,
Oh, yeah.
and then you devised your own method, which was Ashtanga Yoga Innovation. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So, what is Ashtanga Yoga Innovation, which keeps the essence of tradition and still is the practice is available for anybody who's a non-Ashtangi in a safe way, I believe, but still, inherits the essence of Ashtanga. So, what made you start this specific form, and what is it all about?
So the I method is composed of 3 parts, and one part of the I method is Ashtanga yoga. That's where it all started, the I method. And so I'm an Ashtanga practitioner for many, many years. And I was teaching Ashtanga yoga, and I'm still teaching Ashtanga yoga just as I learned it. So I teach Ashtanga yoga and I practice Ashtanga yoga as I learned it from my teachers, Pattabhi, Jois, and also from BNS Iyengar. But I'm also a medical doctor. I don't want to injure my people, so my students. So when somebody comes to my class, I want to create a safe environment. From my point of view, there is nothing against the Ashtanga tradition, because that's what I also saw Pattabhi Jois doing. So if you had a connection with Pattabhi Jois and you told him, "Oh, Pattabhi, I have a pain in my wrist," Pattabhi said, "Oh yeah, don't push on your wrist." Yeah. And if you said, "Oh, I have back pain," and Pattabhi Jois said, "Don't go deep in a back bend." Yeah, I think every good teacher should do this. And that's exactly what I also did. So when students came to me, I took care that they can practice Ashtanga yoga in a safe way. And as certainly I'm younger compared to Pattabhi Jois, and I studied medicine, so I have a little bit more movement physiology background and a modern background compared to Pattabhi Jois, who lived kind of almost 100 years ago, yeah. So when he was young, so there's a more modern point of view on how the physical body works, how therapy works, and so I'm very specific in how I modify a posture for different people to create a safe journey in Ashtanga yoga. The effect is that students of mine, I have 84-year-old student practicing here in my school, Ashtanga yoga, and certainly she's not jumping. She's not putting her foot behind her head. She's 84 years old, yeah? So it would be a kind of a crime if I say, "Oh, you need to put the foot behind the head or you need to jump." No, I say, step back, bend your knee, do it like this. And she's still breathing. She's still following the same fixed sequence as everybody else. Yeah, she's still practicing in her own way. And that's what I support. And I try to teach that nobody gets injured. For me, this is completely traditional Ashtanga yoga. This has nothing go against the Ashtanga tradition. Unfortunately, especially possibly in Germany, there are many Ashtanga teachers who believe that Ashtanga yoga is acrobatics. So if you practice Ashtanga yoga, you need to jump. No matter if you have pain in your wrist, you need to do chaturanga. If your wrist
So I have
hurts,
a question here, Dr. Ronald, a question here, and I think that this is one confusion that I come across a lot. That's even my confusion as well. So when you're saying that when you're doing a practice and there's a certain way how it has been taught by the tradition, so the thought that you're saying, which got inherited in many teachers, was that if this has to be done this way, it has to be done this way only. Is this thought coming from the teachers, or is this thought coming from Pattabhi Jois?
so how I experienced it, the sequence is like a melody, like a piece of music. I'm sticking to the fixed sequence, I'm sticking to the melody, but how I create this melody, it's my own thing. So you can play a piece of music on the piano, but you can also play it on the flute. It's still the
Right.
same melody, it's the
Right.
same piece of music, and that's what I'm doing. So I'm teaching the sequence, but I can show you as one example, one simple example, just one
Yeah,
movement,
please.
as I do it. For example, when you do the Ashtanga Yoga Sun Salutation, so the way that you most classically see, the feet are together, and then you lift the arms up, and then you place your hands together, which is fine, which is the way how I practice it. But many of the students, especially when you start Ashtanga Yoga, they have a little problem balancing with the feet together. So I say, when you come first in your Ashtanga class, place your feet apart. Yeah, like this. And then many people have shoulder issues. So when you lift up the arms like this, the shoulder hurts. So what I suggest is like lift up the arms just like this. So for me, this is a complete traditional way of doing this movement, just as an easy start. And it goes on like this. Certainly in Ashtanga Yoga, as I learned it, you go up and then you go down with the arms forward with straight legs and place the hands here. But it's a lot of leverage on the back. If your back is strong and you've practiced a lot, that's absolutely fine. That's how I do it. But students, when they start Ashtanga Yoga, especially if they're a little older, I say, okay, put the feet apart. So we lift the arms, and when you go down, first bend your knees, catch your hands. So you also go down, but the knees are bent, the feet are apart. I'm not going down that deep. Yeah. And like this, I go through this full sequence of Ashtanga Yoga with people, and I say, bend your knees, don't jump, don't push. And suddenly they're getting more flexible. And when they do it a while, then certainly the shoulder gets strong, the wrist gets strong, they go into more difficult things, but they start soft. So the AYI Method, when it comes to Ashtanga Yoga, it's about systematically adapting poses and movements to the individual and starting easy and getting difficult. So we're not starting difficult and waiting until an injury happens and go down. So we start easy, and I say, this is your first Ashtanga class, so please take it soft. Stick to what I'm saying. Take it soft, and then when you're practicing more often, I show how can you do it more acrobatic if you like. Yeah, if you like. And the
So
second,
basically, step-by-step approach. Start
yes,
wherever you are and take it one step out.
yes. And the effect of teaching Ashtanga Yoga like this is the rate of injuries in my classes, luckily, is very low. Because I
I'm
always
sure.
encourage people to take it low, to take it soft, to adjust. And if you hear about Ashtanga Yoga, you often hear, oh, it's injury prone and it's so acrobatic and it's so physically challenging. Certainly, everybody is challenging. But if you take a step-by-step approach, and if you start easy, and if you are able to adapt, the possibility of getting an injury is very low. Yeah, you can get an injury with everything that you're doing. Same with the Ashtanga Yoga, how I teach it, but it's not often. And the
That
second thing,
absolutely makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. And it's quite logical. Like start wherever you are, go slow and gradually build that strength to reach where it is meant to be.
which I believe is how Ashtanga yoga is meant to be. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
for me, it's not
Absolutely.
contra tradition. And the second thing is alignment is a very important thing for me. So I think when we do a movement repetitively, so we do the same sequence every day, it's important to be very precise how to create tension in our body to
Mhm.
stabilize our joints. So suggest not to just go in kind of a trikonasana, however you go in, or you try to touch your head to your knee or whatever, and it doesn't matter how. I say, be precise how you are doing the postures, how you create the tension in the body, how your ligament, how your joints are standing over each other, which tension is in which muscle. And again, I think it's very important to prevent injury and to create a health practice over long term. And again, I don't think this is contra Ashtanga yoga.
Mhm.
Now, just the question, why did I started calling it Ashtanga Yoga Innovation? Very easy, because there are, especially in Germany, quite some Ashtanga teachers who have a different point of view. So they say you should not adapt the pose at all. So even the 85-year-old woman should jump and
Uh-uh.
chaturanga, and yeah, and then you should, alignment is not part of Ashtanga yoga. If you do alignment, it's Iyengar yoga, it's not Ashtanga yoga, is what some people say. I don't believe
Mhm.
it. Yeah. But I wanted to notice with the eye that this is, yes, this is traditional Ashtanga yoga, but we
Mhm.
are taking care for your health. And
Okay.
when you're a student and you want to learn Ashtanga yoga and you are healthy and young, you can go to any teacher. But if you say, oh, I have a little issue here, I want to be, that the teacher is a little careful, a little bit more systematic, and then you see the word I, then you know, okay, this teacher had a teacher training where anatomy, alignment, yoga therapy was a big part of the teacher training, and the teacher is able to adjust the poses to create
Mhm.
alignment, which not every Ashtanga teacher, unfortunately is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is
Right.
one part of the I method.
Okay. No, I mean, great to know because I think, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Like, what's the point if you're injuring yourself just to reach that perfection? So you have to start wherever you are and then, reach there.
Yeah,
Great.
no
So,
pose. We had a joke when we did Ashtanga yoga many years ago. We had a joke
mhm,
like every yogi, you want to do photos. Yeah, you want to do photos of
mhm,
your most advanced and skillful poses. And we had a joke,
mhm.
fuck off with the knee for the photo.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's actually a reminder that
Uh-huh.
no pose is it worth to risk an injury. So
Absolutely.
my suggestion is listen to your body. If your body doesn't want to sit in a lotus position, don't do it. Yeah.
Mhm.
If your body doesn't want to do a headstand for neck issues, don't go in the headstand.
Right.
Adjust the poses that you have the effect of them. You have the effect of a lotus position or of a headstand without risking an injury. That's what I really want. And it doesn't matter if it looks acrobatic. It's about, for
Mhm.
me, it's about health. I want to create a healthy movement pattern that you can stick to for many, many, many years without injuring yourself.
That makes sense, definitely. So, Dr. Ronald, now, again, since you blend the scientific understanding into the Ashtanga practice, where do you think or where do you fit the subtle elements of the Ashtanga practice from the scientific perspective? Like, for example, regulation of breath, for example, recitation of mantras, or the bandhas, which are the concepts which I think are away from the scientific understanding or perspective of looking at fitness practices. It's all physical, physical, physical. But where do these subtle elements of Ashtanga practice fit in into the scientific understanding?
Yeah, in the I method, we have three parts of the I method. The Ashtanga yoga I was talking about is just one part.
Okay.
The second part is, I call it yoga,
Mm-hmm.
is for me, it's very important to see where yoga comes from. So for me, I'm studying the old texts, so the source texts of yoga a lot. I also study Indology to understand more about Sanskrit and the tradition. And in our teacher trainings, or the teacher trainings that I run, we look into the original source texts, and we do the original techniques described in the source text, which I think is something very unique. So, for example, in 2 weeks, I'm doing a teacher training week. It's not an Ashtanga teacher training. It's a teacher training about, in this case, it's about the link between Tantra and Hatha, and we are diving into the original source text of the Pratyabhija Hridaya, which is a tantric text. And we read the text, we are reciting the text, we are doing all techniques which are described in the text and its commentary, and the students have direct access to the text. So it's not like I teach about the text. I'm teaching the students how to read the text in Sanskrit and how to understand what's in there, and then how to practice this ancient practice. And those old practices, they are mostly about meditation, about breath control. And so as part of our teacher training, the physical Ashtanga practice, the fixed sequence, and those things is about 1/3 of the full thing. The second third of it is source texts, which we recite, which we discuss about, and which we practice all techniques in. And so every day includes a meditation, a breathing exercise, recitation, which for me makes yoga complete. If it's only about physical practice, then certainly the physical practice will become meditative in Ashtanga yoga. But for me, yoga needs to be more. It needs to include the old texts from India, the old philosophy, the old meditative techniques, which should be part of a yoga practice, and they are part of my personal practice as well.
So when you teach, or maybe when you look at somebody who's experiencing some kind of health concerns and comes to you as a patient, somebody coming to a doctor as a patient, do you also talk about philosophy or all of these subtle elements if you're trying to help a person or treat a person from a medical perspective, being a doctor?
Yes, this is the third part of the I method. So I method has 3 parts. The third part of the I method, this is where the name yoga doc came to me, is I help people through movement and modern movement science to create balance in their body, but also using ancient and modern yoga techniques. So classical Ashtanga yoga poses, traditional Hatha yoga or yoga meditative techniques, breathing techniques, and modern movement skills, as it appears to work from a scientific point of view to help a person creating balance in his or her body and mind. One example is there's the very famous breathing exercise called Shitali, where you inhale through your tongue, which comes from the Hatha Pradipika from the 15th century. At least that's one of the texts that describes it. The technique might be about 500 or 600 years part of the yoga practice. So it's an old technique, and it's described in the old texts how it works. They say it's regulating pitta dosha, which means it's regulating the heat in your body, physical heat, but also the emotional heat. And so this is very interesting. But the question that's for me also interesting is there science behind it? And in this case, there is science behind it. If you inhale with a resistance, you're lowering a blood pressure if it's too high, and you're lowering your heart rate, which then links beautifully to the traditional thing that's described. When you lower a blood pressure that's too high and you lower your heart rate, you feel more cool. And so I teach Shitali for people who want a healthy heart, for people who have a high blood pressure in this yoga doc setting. And it's very interesting, this link between traditional techniques, also for example, the alternate nostril breathing, which is possibly the most ancient complex breathing technique of yoga. I know it from the Shiva Sutra Vimarshini, which is about from the 10th century, so it's about 1,000 years part of the yoga practices, the alternate nostril breathing. So it might be the oldest, more complex breathing technique. And the yogis describe the right nostril as activating, the left nostril is cooling. Describe it through Ida and Pingala Nadi. I think it might be a little bit too much to explain this in detail, what the yogis described. But there have been modern studies which showed a functional MRI of the brain, and it shows that indeed, when you're breathing through the right nostril, in this case, the right hemisphere is getting more active, which has exactly the same effects as the yogis described or explained 500 or possibly even 1,000 years ago, which really thrills me because it shows there were people about 1,000 years ago, they were breathing through one nostril for that amount of time and were observing so precise that they said, okay, I'm breathing through one nostril, for hours, and then I get a feeling, and then they describe the feeling, and then they say, okay, that's Ida and Pingala Nadi. You can't prove this on a scientific way, but now we do a functional MRA, and we say, oh, indeed, and I'm really thrilled because I'm doing this exercise a lot, and I feel it, but I wouldn't dare to tell it if there wouldn't be a science behind it.
Absolutely, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's what the third part, the yoga doc part, is about. So we are taking old and new techniques to optimize the health, the physical and the mental health of the practitioners.
Okay, perfect. That's amazing. So now, the modifications in the Ashtanga sequence, being a non-Ashtangi, this idea sounds very, very interesting to me because, at my age, if I want to practice Ashtanga, I know I have some starting point where I don't have to worry about being a perfectionist into the practice, which is a thought very deeply ingrained in the people who are Ashtangis. So from a non-Ashtangi perspective, I do understand those modifications do make sense. But for an Ashtangi, how does this idea sit in? Does it sit well, or it's more about being a perfectionist into the sequence to be done the way it has been taught?
It depends. Very young and new Ashtangis very often think this idea is stupid. The older and more experienced the Ashtanga teacher becomes, the more they are thrilled by this idea. That's really funny. I talked with many of the really old practitioners who started practicing with Pattabhi Jois in the 70s, and basically all of them are very open to modifications of the sequence, because when you practice long enough, it's you just realize it is not working to do a posture in the same way as Krishnamacharya taught it 1924, so 100 years ago, to 12-year-old Indian boys. So I'm always telling my students, firstly, we are not 1924, so movement science evolved. If you go to gymnastics or swimming, we are not swimming in the style of 1924. We are swimming in a different way. If you do gymnastics, we are not doing the handstand and gymnastic as the handstand was 1924. So gymnastics became a completely different sport. Swimming became a completely different sport. Running, the running technique evolved. Why should we stick to the movements just as it was as Krishnamacharya taught them 100 years ago? This is the first thing. The second thing is, we are not Indians. You are Indian, but I'm not, and my students also not. I don't think this is about if you're Indian or European, but in the time where Krishnamacharya taught in India, sitting on a chair was kind of unusual. So when you went to the toilet, when I was in India, the toilet was squatting toilets.
That makes sense, yes.
So you open your hip. when you eat, when I went to India, it's very usual that you eat in the
Sitting
living
on the
room,
floor and eating.
sitting on the floor. Yeah. When you go to the
Yeah.
temple, you sit on the floor.
On the floor. Yeah.
In Germany, the toilet is a chair. The church is a chair. You're sitting a baby in a chair. You're eating in a table in a chair. The hip shapes differently. And the effect is Europeans mostly will never be able to do the lotus position without injuring their knee, because the hip joint is differently shaped because the way we grew up. Because when you're grown up, you can reshape your hip, but only in a little amount. If you grow up as a child and you spend a lot of time sitting on the floor, as 1924 Krishnamacharya students did. So the lotus position for an 8-year-old or 12-year-old boy in India is a piece of cake. It's easy for them.
Absolutely.
The lotus position for an European is very often unreachable, and then the Europeans try to do the lotus position and injure their knee. Next difference is the age. The students of Krishnamacharya, 1924, they were kids, 12-year-olds. Yeah? So Krishnamacharya was teaching at school, so he had 4 classes. That's why primary, intermediate, advanced. Usually, the students learned it in 1 year. They learned primary series because they were 12 years old. My students, usually when they start, are 35, 40, 45, 50. Some students start with 70. Certainly, I need a different approach compared to a 12-year-old. And then it's also this male-female thing. So the students of Krishnamacharya, they were boys. Yeah? So they were 12-year-old Indian boys, 1924. And my students are mostly female, which also leads to some different proportions, some different physical abilities. And so we shouldn't stick to the didactic and everything that was taught in 1924. We need to adapt it, that it makes sense from the modern point of view. Yeah, and it doesn't, for me, this is not about contra tradition. For me, this is part of tradition. A tradition needs to adapt, needs to keep its core, its essence, which is the breathing meditation, the fixed sequence, the Mysore style. That's what I keep. But how I teach it, the slow progress, that's something that's the modern approach to Ashtanga yoga.
No, that's absolutely making sense. I think, yeah, I mean, that kind of a thought process is absolutely valid for today's times, for sure. So, my next question is a little controversial. So there was this wave which started a few months back, which was about a lot of Ashtangis actually posting about why I quit Ashtanga practice. So, yeah. So, so the question is, this practice has been there for almost 100 years. It's benefited so many people in multiple ways. Why after 100 years, so many people now come up and say, why I quit Ashtanga? So what's going on that front?
I think the whole thing, actually, I believe it was me who put it forward. I was the first one who posted why I quitted Ashtanga, why I finally
is it?
Ashtanga yoga.
Oh,
and
amazing.
then my students said, oh, it's funny, look, she's posting the exactly same post as you did 2 weeks ago, and now I see it a lot, why I quit Ashtanga yoga, why I didn't quit Ashtanga yoga. I posted why I quit Ashtanga yoga. It was
so just to complete my question, as you mentioned in this entire conversation, that there are modifications, easy modifications available that can be really applied to this sequence, and which makes it comfortable for everybody to practice. So, what is the need to quit when we have ways to adapt to this practice?
Yeah, for me, it was just an Instagram hook. So it was just a hook to create clicks.
But it took a different form, for sure. I mean, for the outsider, it took a different form.
And I explained it in the post below. And what I explained it is that some people in the Ashtanga world believe you need to practice Ashtanga yoga only in the way that a 12-year-old Indian boy practiced 1924. And they say, oh, Ronald is not teaching or doing Ashtanga yoga anymore. And so I said, oh, why did I quit Ashtanga yoga? Some people say I quit it because I'm not teaching like this. But for me, it doesn't really matter, because when I roll out my mat, I still practice Ashtanga yoga. This was basically the post that I created. And many teachers jumped on it and they took it in different ways. Some said why I did quit Ashtanga yoga. Some said why I quit. And possibly they really left the idea of breathing meditation and sequence. So it's different what people understood. So for me, I just quitted Ashtanga yoga in the perspective of some people who believed that Ashtanga yoga should look as it looked in 1924.
Okay, so the context was different, but it was understood in a different way by different teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I believe that, that kind of a clarity is important, because it took a different turn, and different thoughts coming in, which were confusing. Like, being a non-Ashtangi, for me, when I read that, I was like, this practice has really helped so many people, and when the just modifications are available, so why? But yeah, I mean, that makes sense, that it was more of a hook thing, nothing else.
So why some people stopped doing Ashtanga yoga is, from my point of view, mostly two things that many people who do an Ashtanga yoga are doing wrong. Thing number one is they are not applying modifications and alignment to their practice. So if you do a practice with not being able to modify it and not creating alignment, it will lead to injury. That's just a matter of fact. And so when you have not learned how to modify and align your practice, you need to quit Ashtanga yoga on one point, because everybody will injure themselves, not necessarily through the practice. For example, for me, some years ago, I fell from my bike. I injured my wrist. I was not able to put any weight on my wrist. I couldn't do even cat-cow. So I needed to modify my practice to keep practicing, because I love Ashtanga yoga. I don't want to push through the pain, because pain rarely gets better when you push through it. I needed to modify it quite drastically, because I couldn't put weight on my hand. Luckily, my hand healed. I can put it again on. So this is one reason. The other reason is, from a modern movement science, it's necessary to create a very diverse type of movement pattern. So if you have only one type of movement pattern and you create it over and over again, and it's the only thing that you're doing physically, it will lead to a disbalance and an injury. And so for my own practice, and also what I teach, and there comes the third part of the AYI Method, the yoga doc, you need to add some things to an Ashtanga practice. For example, Ashtanga practice is a lot of static stretching, mostly in the forward and backward direction. That's why the yoga mat is longitudinal. Yeah, so you're doing a sun salutation, which is forward and backward. Yeah, then you're doing a Trikonasana, and the Trikonasana Ashtanga yoga, basically it's more a forward bend than a side bend. You're doing, so it's all forward bending, and you're keeping static for 5 breaths, but it's static in a posture where you create stretch. And so if you do this movement pattern as your only physical thing that you're doing, you will create a balance in the body, and you will injure yourself. And so I think it's very important to stay healthy, to have a complete movement spectrum. So for me, I do Ashtanga yoga, which is beautiful, but I also do the yoga doc practice, which includes a lot of strength exercises. Yeah, so if people ask me, where are your arms from? Yeah, I get this question a lot. People say, Ronald, where did you get your arms? And I say, oh, I do yoga. And then I say, but you also do strength training. And I say, it's a difficult question, because yes, I do strength training, but for me, the strength training is part of this yoga doc practice. So I do a lot of strength training. I do the same amount I stretch, I do strength training. and I do dynamic strength training. If you do strength training in Ashtanga yoga, people say, oh, Ashtanga yoga has a lot of strength. And then they come with Navasana, which is a static pose. You're holding for 5 breaths, Navasana. Oh, there's Virabhadrasana. Yes, it's a strength pose, but it's again static. There's Utkatasana. Yes, it's static. But we need a diverse movement pattern. So we need dynamic strength movements. And I do a lot of twisting strength movements to create a more balanced body, and a lot of other things which might be a little too much to explain. And so for me, it's necessary, and that's what I teach, to complement the pure Ashtanga practice that I try to keep pure, just modifying it and adding alignment with things that are completely a new spectrum of movement. And if you don't do this, you will loosen the integrity of your body. This will also happen with other types of yoga. Yeah, so Vinyasa yoga basically is the same thing. You also have a lot of stretching poses, and the strength poses are usually static. So you need to add different patterns of movement, which I actively promote, that we can have a healthy yoga practice throughout our life. So my practice is traditional Ashtanga yoga, meditative philosophy based on source texts, and yoga doc, which is a lot of modern things included in the practice. And this, for me, gives a complete yoga practice.
No, that's quite interesting. So, since we're running out of time, just last 2 questions. The first one is, with the kind of strength that is required for Ashtanga practice, because I haven't come across any of the dietary requirements for somebody who's practicing Ashtanga practice. So, is there any concept of upping your protein or going high on protein supplements when you're practicing Ashtanga, considering it's a very strength practice, or any other dietary requirements? Is that concept present in the world of Ashtangis?
So Pattabhi Jois, he didn't teach anything about nutrition. The only thing that he taught about nutrition is coffee gives prana, and he taught to a woman who looked, in my perspective, quite a lot anorectic. He told her, eat more chapati. This were the only nutritional advices that I heard from Pattabhi Jois. From my
simple and precise.
Yeah, it's not a lot. So basically, people eat what they used to eat. And many yogis eat a vegetarian or vegan diet, because when you dive in the philosophy of yoga, it depends how you look at it. Many people say, and I also see it like this, that a vegetarian diet is, from an ethical point of view, something that makes sense. For me, I believe to be healthy, just movement, which yoga offers movement, and meditative and relaxation things, is not enough to really stay healthy. You really need a very healthy diet to stay healthy at the end. And I take a lot of care for my diet. I'm optimizing my amino acid profile, and I'm optimizing my vitamin uptake, and I'm actually analyzing in my blood the amino acid profile, the hormones. And so I'm big in this. It's not really part of the Ashtanga thing, and I'm also not teaching it, because I think it's enough if I teach movement, if I teach meditative aspects. So I don't talk about nutrition, but for me, nutrition is a big point, and I'm doing a lot of effort and research to create a nutrition that's optimal, adapted to my body, and monitoring it, that it works well. And I have the feeling that I'm doing quite good in it. And possibly one hint, eating a vegan diet and getting all vitamins and amino acids that you need is kind of a challenging task. So
absolutely, yes.
If somebody wants to do it, the person needs to to take a lot of effort for it. It's not possible to explain anything, but to be a little careful, because I often see yogis who eat a vegan diet and they kind of fast themselves down, and
Mm-hmm.
the body suffers because the body lacks nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the body lacks nutrition, it recovers slower, and then you are prone to injuries. So take care of
Yeah.
your nutrition, which is, especially if you're vegan, far away from easy, and possibly even some supplements. I take supplements. I also don't
Mm-hmm.
make this a big topic, but I also
Mm-hmm.
take supplements because nutrition and health is important for me, and I have a difficulty to get all the nutrition that I believe are important from pasta vegan diet, and so I take some supplements to complement them, and it works, I believe,
Okay.
pretty good for me.
No, definitely. I mean, I'm a very strong believer of having the right diet, preparing your body for anything that you do, and that comes with the nutritional requirements. So, my last question, again, a controversial question. If you, I'm talking of this from the perspective of a patient going to a doctor who may or may not have a yoga background or may not have a very intense yoga background, and if they have any kind of um, uh, concerns with the body which can be healed with the yoga practice. A doctor would never say that. So they would not recommend yoga as a therapy. They would recommend yoga as an add-on thing just to, I mean, so that the medicine stands higher as compared to the yoga. But coming from a space of understanding philosophy, meditation, breath work, we do realize that yoga can has the power to reverse, unlike medicine. So you being a doctor as well as a intensely into Ashtanga practice, tradition of yoga, what is your approach? Do you think, or do you recommend yoga therapy as the first line of treatment to your patients, or do you think that medicine is something that's the first line of action and then you recommend yoga as a side thing?
It's it really depends. It's a very complex question. So when you go to a medical doctor and you ask the medical doctor, do you recommend yoga as a treatment for high blood pressure?
Mm-hmm.
Usually the medical doctor knows nothing about yoga. That's the first
Right.
thing. The second thing is, even if the medical doctor knows something about yoga, this patient needs to go to a yoga teacher who knows techniques which can
Right.
specifically help with a high blood pressure. So that's not so easy. Then the second thing is, the patient, they need to be willing to do the things. So if
Mm-hmm.
you have a high blood pressure, you go to the doctor knows exactly how a pill will work.
Mm-hmm.
He describes you a pill, or they describe you a pill. You take the pill and the blood pressure drops. So it's a very easy solution. And for many people, that's the right solution. I recommend, if you are willing to do something yourself, go to the medical doctor, check up what's wrong with you. Is there a treatment necessary? Take an MRI,
Mm-hmm.
take a blood test, check what's necessary. But then I recommend put your own effort in, because there's no illness and disease where you can't benefit from doing something, whatever. It might be
Mm-hmm.
different. Yeah? So if you have this disease, this might help and this might harm it. If you have this, but you can always do something to make it better. And that's what I recommend. So go to the doctor, check up what's your disease, what's your situation, do the therapy that's necessary, but also do your own thing, which I call yoga. Yeah? So do
Mm-hmm.
your own thing, go on your mat, meditate, breathe, move, do whatever is necessary. And for me, everything that helps us clear our mind
Mm-hmm.
while we're doing it and create balance in our body and mind after we did it, for me, this is yoga. So whatever it is, you can take a barbell or take a fascia cup and do things. If it helps you clear your mind and stay
Right.
balanced after you did it, that's yoga. And you can always, no matter how fucked up your body and mind is, you can always do a little bit. Possibly you
Right.
need medical treatment as well, but you
Mm-hmm.
can always do something. And that's what I highly recommend people to do, to try to do whatever you can do.
Perfect. I think, yeah, that's the right approach for sure. So thank you so much, Dr. Ronald, for all the inputs. I think it's been one of my best podcast ever with the kind of inputs that you shared with your experience. Anything as the last ending thing that you would want to mention, which maybe I did not ask or forgot to ask?
So I need an emotional ending of the talk.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
do an emotional ending of the talk or
Okay.
interview. The emotional ending is, in which situation ever you are, there's always something you can do. There's always something you can improve. And that's what keeps me practicing yoga, doing things. There's always something that you can improve. And now the other part, there's always something which you can't change. And I think it's important to also acknowledge this. So there are diseases which are uncurable. There are physical proportions where you can't do a certain pose. Whatever, it's important to accept that our human existence on this earth has limitations. We have a limited life. We have limited physical capacities, which is different for everybody. And we need to accept what's given to us by God, by karma, by genetics, whatever. And on the other hand, do the best out of what we can do. So it's those two things that we need to balance, what to accept and what to change.
I think one of the best advice in this entire session, it all starts from there, what you accept of what is possible and what is not. Great. So thank you so much, Dr. Ronald. It's been really wonderful speaking to you, and thank you once again for coming over and sharing your wonderful insights with us. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you. All the way to India.
Thank you.
Are you in India?
Okay.
You're located in
No,
India?
I'm not in India right now. I'm based in Canada.
Ah,
I moved to Canada about 3 years back, but yeah, I belong to India for sure.
so all the way to Canada. So namaste.
Thank you so much. Namaste. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So good to connect through internet.
Thank you.
Bye.